Hello viewers, Assalamu alaikum. Today's one-on-one program, I'm welcoming Professor Dr. Mohammed Dajani. Professor Dajani, I'm welcoming you in this show.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Professor Mohammed Dajani, he is a very remarkable personality. He's an academician, he's a professor of political science. He is an Arab Palestinian, a peace ambassador, a philanthropic personality, and a person, an institution as well. I am just describing a very brief about himself. Professor Dajani graduated from Lebanese University, from Lebanon, and he was actually born in a Muslim family, very prominent Muslim family in Jerusalem before Israel's declaration of independence. But his parents fled to Egypt in 1947-48. They later returned to Jordan-controlled East Jerusalem. Dajani started in Lebanon and headed the student branch of Fatah guerrilla movement, but the Lebanese government deported him to Syria 1975. But in a short, we'll make his detail in the interview. But in a short, after graduation, there are some academic level. But finally, he masters from Eastern Michigan University of USA, and later first PhD he completed from South Carolina University of South Carolina, and second PhD from University of Texas. He is now the fellow of Washington Institute, fellow of Western Fellowship. So, Professor Dajani, I am welcoming you again, and this is my pleasure to interview you in this show, one-on-one.
Thank you.
There is the biggest issue in this world nowadays. It is the long-lasting, painful event for world peace and harmony. This is Israel-Palestine conflict, and you are not only a professor, you are an activist on your student life. You are heading the your guerrilla wing of Fatah movement, and later you transform yourself as a peace ambassador, or you want to, as a peace-loving people, as a philanthropic personality. You have started a Wasatiyah movement. We'll go to the detail how a guerrilla leader, how a student, very veteran fighter, moved into a peacemaker or leading a peacemaking movement. So, firstly, I want to just move into first. So, Professor, where do we now stand regarding this conflict between Palestine and Israel?
We are hoping that there eventually will be peace, because the only way out of the conflict is to create peace and to build peace. Now, it is very difficult for people to appreciate the fact that peace will happen. And despite the conflict, whether in Gaza or the West Bank with the occupation, yet we are hoping that rationality will eventually dominate. The idea is to be able to create bridges of understanding and hope despite the walls of anger and enmity, so that we can eventually leave to our children a peaceful world. We inherited this conflict from our grandparents, and we hope that we would create a better world for our children.
Yeah, thank you very much. Basically, you and your family has a very glorious past, and there are some huge struggle with your family also involved. So, can you explain about, tell us about yourself, your family, and your struggle?
My name is Mohammed Dajani Daudi. Daudi is in reference to King David, because our family was appointed to be the custodian of the King David tomb in 1525 by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. And since then, our family has been in charge of the and were the custodians of the tomb till 1948. Because of the war that took place, the area came under Israeli control, and then in 1967 the Israeli took hold of it as a result of the 1967 war. So our family is a Jerusalemite family. We have been living there for hundreds of years, and we hope to continue being the good citizens of the city.
And one of your family, I think, grandparent, he was the mayor of the Jerusalem city? Or?
Yes, there were a number of my family members who became mayors in Jerusalem or were in the Chamber of Commerce. We have been established as a family, as a Jerusalemite family for hundreds of years.
Yeah, so far we know regarding your
And actually, when the Ottomans established municipalities throughout the empire in 1864, the first was in Istanbul and the second was in Jerusalem, and they appointed Abdurrahman al-Dajani, who is a distant cousin, a relative, to be the mayor of Jerusalem. So the first mayor of Jerusalem was from the Dajani family.
Okay. So, so far we know you are the 42nd or 43rd descendant of our Prophet Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So, is it through Jordan link or the family link of the Prophet?
No, actually, in our family tree, the link goes back to Hijaz. That's where originally we are from. Okay. And then our family moved with the Arab conquest to Morocco, and then from Morocco to Jerusalem. So that was our roots.
Okay. Basically, in Palestinian conflict, Palestinian-Israel conflict, most of the time, the leadership from Palestinian part, that is the main issue. And how you can explain the leadership of Palestine, particularly pre-Arafat, Arafat regime, and after Arafat, how you can explain the Palestinian nation is moving under these leaderships?
Well, our leadership was determined by others rather than by us. When the British were in charge of the mandate of Palestine, they appointed Sheikh Hajj Amil Husseini to be the Mufti of Jerusalem, despite the fact that he was not that qualified to be in that post, and others from the other families were much more qualified, and they would have wished them to be, but he was appointed by them, and he remained for a very long time to be the leader of the community. He was extremist, and he was in a way very radical, and he was not accommodating, he was not tolerant, and not only that, he refused to have anything to do with the Jews at the time, to accept them as part of the Palestinian community in a diversity and pluralism under the law. Yet, when the second leader was the advocate Ahmed Shouqairi, and he was appointed by the Arab Summit Conference that was held in 1964, and he was there. He was the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization till 1968. when Fatah took over, and then Yasser Arafat was appointed to be the head of the PLO until his death in 2004. And and then the Palestinians elected Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, and he is there till now. So we have
Abu Mazen means Arafat.
No, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas.
Mahmoud Abbas. So this is the full name of Abbas.
Yeah, and so
after Arafat.
Yeah, and so in reality, we have had only 3 leaders. Which is not a good sign for democracy.
Last 70, 80 years, only 3 leaders.
Yeah.
So you were working with Fatah, PLA, as the head of guerrilla movement, young movement, I think. So what can you tell us some experience, not present perspective, definitely your student life, how it was, and why you engaged with this movement, particularly guerrilla movement, and what was your experience at the time?
Well, it was the environment, the Arab environment in the 50s and 60s. It was after the 1948, what the Palestinians call catastrophe. Nakba. And so they were hoping to shift from being labeled and identified as refugees to be identified as freedom fighters, or later to us. So what happened is that when in the 50s and 60s, the Arab world felt very nationalistic, and the Arab movement was very strong, and people were thinking in terms of liberating Palestine by the Arab armies, that the Arab armies will liberate Palestine. However, in 1967, that thesis proved to be wrong, and the Israelis defeated the Arab armies and conquered the West Bank, Gaza, and took over also the Golan Heights and Sinai. And so the Palestinians at that time were hoping that they would, their strategy shifted from being dependent on the Arab armies to becoming dependent on them. And that's where the Palestinian resistance movement emerged. I was caught in that, and in 1967, June 1967, the defeat caused a lot of psychological pressure on everybody that they wanted to do something. And so I joined Fatah at the time in order to help in the liberation of Palestine. It was the idea, Fatah ideology was armed struggle, and and that there should be, it was the summit of, the Arab summit of 1967 made it very clear to say there is no peace with Israel, the 3 no's, there is no negotiations, and there is no recognition. And so that was at the time the state of affairs, extremely radicalized, until things have changed when first Sadat went to Jerusalem and made peace with Israel, and second when Arafat in the Oslo Accords in 1993 recognized Israel and decided to opt to reject the armed struggle, resistance, and to opt for diplomacy and peace.
We are going through on the later issues, because this is the turning points, I think, when PLO already accept Palestine, Israeli state, but later there were some ifs and buts remaining, and Muslim world, they did not engage Muslim world because PLO accepted Israel, but they did not take enough diplomatic steps to move on to the peace process. And why it was happened, I will ask you later. But there is very important question about Arafat. You are working with Arafat, and he is very highly regarded Bangladesh and other Muslim countries. Can you tell us something about your memory, about your good time or bad time with Arafat, and about Arafat himself as well?
Yeah, I joined Fatah in the month of August 1967, and then I was trained as a guerrilla movement in Syria and South Lebanon, and I was introduced to Arafat as our leader at the time, and with other leaders.
Yeah.
And so he emerged from Fatah to be the one officially appointed to be the spokesman of Fatah. And then later he became as a chairman. I met him a couple of times, but I feel that he had played a very big role in trying to shift the image of the Palestinians from being refugees to being freedom fighters and to bringing the issue to world attention. But unfortunately, in my view, when he signed Oslo, the guerrilla mentality in him was much more stronger than the diplomatic, peaceful mentality. And so in dealing with issues, he was not a Nelson Mandela to try to deal with them through a conciliatory vision, but rather to use the militaristic mentality experiences he had. And so in 2000, when he did not get an agreement regarding the Camp David summit, he initiated the intifada, the second intifada, which was a militant intifada, and unfortunately that intifada squashed the peace hopes.
Yeah.
And that was part of our problem, that he was not able to shift from being a guerrilla warfare leader to becoming a diplomatic president of the state of Palestine.
Yeah. How you can explain it? This was the reason behind the birth of Hamas?
I think that Hamas came as a result of the vacancy in the leadership that was left within the Palestinian society, because Fatah was secular and the Palestinian society was moving to becoming religious.
Okay.
And so Hamas emerged to fill that gap where people wanted people wanted to find much more in religion, and that Islam is the solution, rather in the secularism of democracy and others. So here Hamas and Israel supported the idea because they wanted to have
Promote
an
radicalization.
opponent to Fatah, and to divide the Palestinians, to have the more than one group within the
Thank you, Professor Dr. Dajani. I think it is very brief statement regarding the division of PLO, particularly PLO and Hamas. And viewers, we have to take a break, a very short break, a very brief break. We are coming back with the same conversation. Please keep it with us. Hello viewers, we are again in the show. We are discussing with Professor Dr. Dajani, an academician, a political science professor, a philanthropic personality, and a peace ambassador. We are talking about the past of PLO, and he was engaged with the guerrilla wing of very veteran wing of PLO during his student he was a student of university at Lebanon, and we are talking about why PLO was not fully made the history of success, though it was in peace negotiation, and we are talking about the part of Hamas and how it is Palestinian divided into two major wings, and where is the role of Israel also involved directly or indirectly. Now, Professor Mohammed Dajani, I want to ask you about Wasatiyah. Nowadays, you have started this movement from last more than 1 decade ago. What is this? Is it a non-government organization or a political forum or a civil rights activity, or what it is? And
it's
how
all of the above.
you are thinking it here?
In the sense that it was the reason how it was inspired or started. It was back in 2006, late in the year, and it was Ramadan, and on a Friday morning I was standing on the balcony of my house overlooking an Israeli checkpoint, and there were hundreds of people standing against the checkpoint wanting to go to Jerusalem, and the checkpoint was preventing them from crossing because they did not have permits to go to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so the soldiers at the Israeli soldiers at the checkpoint were pushing them back, and they were trying to persuade them not to cross, or to pressure them not to cross, and they were throwing at them tear gas, and I thought that it will be a moment where there will be shooting and there will be people being killed. However, after a while I noticed that things cooled down, and it seems that the Israelis made a deal with the people in which the Israelis brought buses and then allowed the people to go through the checkpoint. They checked them out, and then they took their IDs, and then the buses took them to Jerusalem to pray, and then the buses brought them to the checkpoint back, and they got their IDs, and then they went home. So I was observing what has happened, and it was very inspiring for me, because I felt that this is a win-win situation. The soldiers were worrying about people carrying bombs or knives or things, and the people wanted to go to pray. However, I looked at the people and thought that those are religious, but they are moderate. And if they would have been radical or belonging to a radical party, they would not have accepted to make the deal with the Israelis. In Palestine, we have 10 Islamic parties and around 40 secular parties. And the Islamic parties are extremists. They believe that Palestine is an Islamic waqf, which is Islamic endowment, which there is nothing in the books to say that. And at the same time, they advocate a military option rather than a diplomatic one. They do not advocate any negotiations with Israel or recognition of Israel. The seculars are also, they don't believe in having religion as part of their strategy. So that's where I started the Wasatiyah movement as a strategy that would combine between religion and politics and secularism. And the idea is to to have a party that will appeal to the religious side of the Palestinians or the people, at the same time also to the political side, and that there would be some kind of alliance between religion and politics.
Yeah.
And that's where I decided to use from the Quran, the Holy Quran. It was from Al-Baqarah Surah, the second surah in the Quran, and in verse 142 it says, and God will guide you to the right path. And in verse 143 it says, and thus we have created you a moderate nation. And now if you notice that the surah in itself is composed of 286 verses, and the verse about being created as a moderate nation, as a middle ground nation, is 143. So it exactly comes in the middle to indicate to us that the meaning there is to be tolerant, to be open-minded, to be accepting of the other, to allow religious freedom, to allow people to express themselves. And that's where we adopted that verse to be our slogan. And if you read the Quran, you will tend to find there are many verses in the Quran that calls for moderation, for justice. And that's where I have published at the time this, and we are using the scale, the balance, because this is one of the main contributions of Islam, is justice, and in the sense of the balance, the idea of balance. And so we are hoping that by promoting moderation within society, that this will have an impact not only within the Arab-Israeli conflict, but also within the Palestinian, within the Islamic community itself, because in adopting moderation, we all become brothers, we all become unified, we all become one community. And but unfortunately, that's why we have also started what we call the Wasatiyya education. To call upon the officials to have within the curriculum a moderate teaching, moderate view of Islam, and to have within the curriculum stories, narratives, values that will bring us together rather than those that separate us.
Yeah, that is nor extreme, I think, what you were saying. That is, in Surah Baqarah, I was about to ask the same question, that how you got it. You already explained that in the Surah Baqarah there is 286 total verse, and 142 and 143 it is described that the middle ground, Allah made us, Allah made this world and everything just for middle path, not for any extreme anything. So this is the issue. But people, and in terms of the practice of the society in everywhere, people are very generous, and for this why I think you are giving emphasis people to people dialogue. But you know, government are involved so many things, so many ifs and buts, and sometime some government they are always in practice to encourage radicalization, and their diplomatic different practice also promote the same as well. So how people to people negotiation, people to people conversation and dialogue should be promoted? How? Because there are some bars, there are some boundary, there are some restrictions in everywhere.
By education. I believe that we can move on with education, and through education we can see what is meant within the Quran. Because here there are two sources for Islamic teaching. One is the main source, which is the Quran, the Holy Quran, and then the subsidiary source, which is the Sunnah. And one is the word of God, and the other is the word of man, and it is the Prophet being the messenger of God. And so with the Holy Quran, extremists cannot add or change. So what they do is they misinterpret. They take a verse and change the interpretation of it to suit their political agenda. While with the Hadith, they have enriched the Hadith with other quotations that have no status. And so when we look at it, we believe that we would like to see that the Hadith does not complement the Quran, because the Quran is not supposed to be is supposed to be full and complete, and then to see that the Quran, that what is being interpreted as what being quoted as a Hadith does not contradict the Quran, and so here that's also what we are teaching in Wasatiyah, to have our young people be educated, to be able to look at the verses, at the Quran, and understand it well, and understand it as a message to humanity. Because I think that extremists are teaching it as if it came to replace Judaism and Christianity, while this is not the case. And so there a lot of interpretation within the Quran are interpretation to say this is anti-Jews and anti-Christian, which is not the case. So that's why, and for instance, they take the word to وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, the wasat, which mean middle ground, tolerance, temperance. They take it to claim it means that we are middle between Jews who killed prophets and the Christians who made their prophet a god, and which is the wrong interpretation, because Islam came as a message to all humanity.
Of course. Thank you very much, Professor Dajani. I think this is the main spirit of Islam, and Islam is itself a secular religion because it recognizes all the rights of all other religious groups, all minorities, and every section of the people, privileged or underprivileged groups. And so there are so many instances you already mentioned. And any reform movement anywhere of the world, this is not a bed of roses, not a simple thing. And Professor Dajani has some struggle, and now we can see a very short video. We can see actually what was happened when he started this movement, and then we will discuss about the aftermath and the struggle and the effects and how the issues can move on. Please, we can watch the video.
Mohammed Dajani, the Institute's Weston Fellow, is a Palestinian professor and peace activist. He was born in 1946 to one of Jerusalem's historic Arab families, one that has been the custodian of King David's tomb on Mount Zion since the 14th century. As a young adult, Dajani was a Palestinian revolutionary and an anti-American activist, but his views began to change when he came to the U.S. as a graduate student.
To me, it was like getting out of the cave, because here I became exposed to different ideas, to democracy in practice, in culture, and it was an eye-opener. It was a very unique experience.
Inspired by American values, Dajani went on to create the first American Studies department in the Arab world at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem, where he taught a more balanced view of the United States. He also founded a non-political movement called Wasatiyah, which means middle ground. Wasatiyah promotes tolerance and moderation and teaches how those values are reflected in Islam. Both his work with Wasatiyah and his teaching of American studies reflect Dajani's belief in the importance of empathy for reaching reconciliation. Last year, he bravely took a group of Palestinian students to the Auschwitz death camp in Poland.
To me, it was very important because I thought that this topic is a taboo and people did not want to talk about it, did not want to learn about it because there is this misconception that it is a Zionist narrative. I felt that it is very important that we cannot remain ignorant about this and that we should teach our students what really happened and try to focus on this topic from the human perspective.
He was forced to resign after a months-long campaign of death threats, campus riots, and intimidation. Dajani is now working in the United States to pursue his dream of a moderate Middle East.
Actually, I got introduced to the Institute when I met Dr. Robert Sutloff, and we developed a friendly relationship, and then this helped me see the work he is doing. And I thought what he did regarding the Holocaust and how he studied what Muslims contributed during the Holocaust. And so I thought that's exactly what we are doing, trying to build bridges between communities. And so we co-authored together an article that was titled, "Why Should Palestinians Learn About the Holocaust?" During my stay here, I was shocked to find how much people here learn, what a cultural and enriching environment it is. Also the colleagues around who have so much knowledge and so much experience and are contributing to all this good work. In that sense, I was also very impressed by the fact that I, as a Palestinian, is part of it, as well as many others who have come before me. I think that it is very important. This is, I think, part what we promote in Wasatiyah, to be able to know the other and to be able to understand the other and to learn about the other.
At a time of unprecedented violence and extremism in the Middle East, Dajani is a voice of moderation.
And trying to fight extremism, political force might work on the short run, but on the long term, it is ideology which is important. And that's why I believe that we need to promote moderation in order to have an ideology that will fight the extremist ideology.
Professor Dajani, now I want to raise the same issues what we are talking about the video. You have lost your job in university, your car was burned, you were threatened by some people who were not liking this middle path or this reform values or reform ideologies. What was the why this type of reaction was coming from university authorities or in general from your society? Why?
I was the founder of the American Studies program at the university. It's a graduate master's degree program, and I was the head of the libraries at the university. And so as part of my educational mission was to educate students and give them knowledge, even by breaking taboos. And one of the taboo in Palestine and the Arab world and the Muslim world is the Holocaust. And so what happened is that we decided to do a project in order to study reconciliation and how does understanding the misery of the other, the suffering of the other, will impact your feeling for reconciliation. And so we took 30 Israeli students to a Palestinian camp, refugee camp, so that they could learn about the suffering of the Palestinians. And then we took 30 Palestinians, actually 30, but then they dropped to 27 Palestinian students to Auschwitz in Poland. And the idea was to have them look at the suffering of the other and study its impact on them regarding reconciliation with the other. And so at the same time, for me, it was I wanted my students to learn, to have knowledge about what happened in the Holocaust, because unfortunately it's not being taught as part of the educational curriculum, and also that whatever is being taught about it within the Arab world, within Palestine, is not documented. It's not true. There is a lot of denial, and there is, and so we also started workshops to teach Palestinians about the Holocaust, and but unfortunately there was efforts really to label me as a cooperator with Israel, as a traitor, and and so my students demonstrated against me at the university, and I think that there was a lot of incitement to make them do so, and then I was forced to resign from my job, and then my car was torched, and I was also threatened in order to stop teaching. But I see it from also a religious view, in the sense that the Holy Book tells us and say, God advance me in knowledge. And those who are learned are not of the same level as those who are not learned. And so I believe that
Professor, I think we can remember the life of our Prophet as well, because any reform or anything good, anything light, that definitely should face very critical reality and very tough reality. What we have learned already, we have seen some on video as well. So we are at the end, nearest to the end. I want to request you to say few things regarding your very important one thing. Your goal is to make it reality, that this is the reality, that is Jewish state Israel and an Arab state Palestine. So and the protection of minorities in both states. So in this movement, how your movement will contribute, where radicalization in every side, particularly in Israeli side, you see what is going on, everybody know, and in Palestinian side there are so many ifs and buts are going on, and you see where we are now sitting here, chief priest of Jewish, they are interfering in British politics as well. So there are so many questions. I am not going through any moral or any particular issues, but I am talking about that this crucial reality, how your movement will contribute for reconciliation, and to do you see any light end of the tunnel?
Definitely. The work with wasatiyya and our work with moderation, we view things as a cycle. And so by promoting moderation within both communities, the Palestinian community and the Israeli community, we are hoping to create an environment that's conducive for reconciliation. And then reconciliation ushers in negotiations in good faith. Negotiations would lead to peace and to a comprehensive, just solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Eventually, this will cause prosperity, and this would bring in democracy and development and cooperation within the region. And so that's our vision, and that's why we believe that if an Israeli sitting in Tel Aviv watching a Palestinian in the Palestinian territories, or a Palestinian observing an Israeli, that they will hear that there is a message of peace between them,
and harmony.
And that and in this way, one does not want to kill the other, and one does not want to annihilate the other, and both are willing to share the land rather than to take over the land and reject the other. And so that's where we are trying to build bridges between both communities, in order that we can communicate the message that we would like to have peace within our community and your community as the other. And in this way, we want to promote the peace camp within Israel. As a result, we don't call for boycotts. We call for normalization.
To know each other and to just move on to by
because
harmony, and
we
to
believe
know
that
each other, yeah.
in boycotts you build walls, and in
Yes.
walls you have enmity. While
Okay.
without the walls,
Okay.
you can communicate, you can talk. Our the solution here, it's not a win-lose situation.
Yeah,
Yani
Professor Dajani,
we need to make it a win-win situation.
Yeah, I'm requesting you. Already, we know you are networking with Arab peace-loving groups, academicians, and peace groups, or there are some reconciliation groups working for reconciliation worldwide. You are networking with them. You are building bridges within the communities and within the Palestinian and Israeli institutions as well. So, and you also going to work in United Kingdom as well. What is your last message to our viewers? Because this television, TV1, is also working for the same. TV1 means one God, one everything. So what is your last call to the viewers and this interview?
I will say the same thing I've said in other forums, in other universities, in other countries. Particularly, I was in South Africa, and I noticed that there are, within the universities, within the communities, there are two camps. There is one pro-Israel and one pro-Palestine. And my message was at the university at the time was, don't be pro one party against the other party. Don't be pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. Be pro-peace, be pro-reconciliation. And in this way, you are being pro-humanity. You are being pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, and serving. Instead of importing our conflict to your country, export to us your Nelson Mandela's concept of rainbow and pluralism and diversity within the community, which is the message of Islam. And this is basically the message of Islam is a message of peace. It's a message of love. It's a message, and extremists try to make it a message of hate. But in our work, we are trying to reform this concept within the communities, within even the Islamic communities. And so we are hoping that our youth will work for moderation and will learn Islam from the wasatiyya perspective.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Mohammed Dajani Daudi, your very valuable time for TV1 and our viewers. Dear viewers, that's all. We hope Professor Dr. Mohammed Dajani and his movement Wasatiyya, the middle path, will succeed one day, and not only for his geographical area between Israel and Palestine, but also in worldwide, where conflict is going on, but for religion, for ethnic rights, for democratic rights, and for other things, reconciliation, dialogue, and just move on the way of peace. Dear viewers, thank you very much for watching this show, and see you soon and later for other shows. Thank you very much.
Thank you.